Welcome to the EuroSSIG podcast, 40 Years of Digital Turbulences from the 1990s to the 2030s. Sandra Hoferichter talks to Wolfgang Kleinwächter, who is a professor emeritus from University of Aarhus, where he was teaching a master course on internet policy and regulation. He was a director to the ICANN board and involved in most UN processes on internet governance since the beginning of the 1990s. And together we are organizing the European Summer School on Internet Governance since 2006 annually in Meissen. Wolfgang, welcome. Our first podcast is on the institutional framework, ICANN, IGF, and the IR panel and all related institutions. Wolfgang, the internet has no central authority. There are numerous institutions which manage the technical core resources of the internet and are dealing with internet-related public policy issues. How the system has been evolved?
Yeah, the internet is the result of what somebody has called a grand collaboration. So many different people were involved in developing a decentralized communication system, which was called later the internet. It was a network, and then the networks were connected via the TCP/IP protocol, which was developed by Windsurf and Bob Kahn in the 1970s. And the connection of networks was called the internet. But this was just a very technical system which was evolving over the years, and more features were added to this basic network connections when John Postel developed the domain name system. So he said, okay, we can connect every computer in the world with every computer in the world, and then we have to identify these computers, and we need identifiers. First it was like telephone numbers, it was just IP addresses. Later it became domain names, and so a very decentralized system of different mechanisms emerged, which later were institutionalized. So John Postel created the IANA, which was responsible for management of the root server. Then the IP address managers created their regional internet registries. And John Postel remained the master of the domain name system. And when Tim Berners-Lee developed the World Wide Web in the early 1990s, it became clear that this is much more than a toy for academics to enhance their communication, that this will have economic and also political implications. And so the idea from Postel was to organize this in a much enhanced way. And he wanted to introduce hundreds of new top-level domains, which then became a conflict with the US government, because the US government said, okay, this is now so important and we will have to play a certain role. And this was the moment when John Postel tried to organize a totally new form of international collaboration by going to the ITU and creating a so-called interim ad hoc committee for new generic top-level domains, a very cryptic name. And the ITU was very excited because it managed the telecommunication system, and it was unclear who will manage the domain name system. And when this proposal for this new MOU between the ITU and IANA, John Postel's, was discussed, then the US government intervened and stopped it. And the counter-proposal, which was developed by the US government, was then ICANN.
ITU is an intergovernmental organization dealing with global telecommunication. So why did it not get the mandate for the internet?
The Clinton administration had a fear that if the internet becomes the subject of intergovernmental negotiations, this will stop innovation. So that means regulation will kill innovation. And that's why they preferred to leave it in the hand of the private sector, of the people who are concerned and affected by the internet. And the counter proposal was to recognize that the internet is a public good, but it should be managed by the concerned and affected stakeholders. And so the idea of ICANN, the idea of a multi-stakeholder organization, emerged in this conflict. And when the ITU had its plenipotentiary conference in Minneapolis in the year 1998. There was a compromise, so that means the ITU got the right to organize a World Summit on the Information Society, but the ITU gave up to manage the domain name system. And 1 week after the Minneapolis ITU conference, ICANN was established, and ICANN is now the manager of the domain name system and the critical internet resources.
But was there, so to say, an internet governance conflict within WSSIG?
Yeah, the ITU was not happy, or some people in the ITU were not happy with this compromise in Minneapolis. And so, but they realized that the information society, which was in an emerging phase in the late 1990s, is much bigger than the internet. And so they prepared this World Summit on the Information Society, which started in 2002. And some people in the ITU wanted to get back via the WSSIG the control over the domain name system. So there was a conflict between governmental leadership, which was supported by a number of governments, Russia, China, and also a lot of developing countries, and private sector leadership. And during the WSSIG negotiations, then this conflict went very deep. And there was a risk that the whole summit will fail. Then they established a working group on internet governance, gave them a mandate to find a compromise. And the compromise was the multi-stakeholder approach. So that means governments are involved in internet governance, but they are not the only decision maker. For the whole mechanism now for internet governance is based on the concept of sharing. So that means different organizations have different responsibilities for different parts of the internet.
Was this the so-called compromise in the Tunis agenda?
Yes, in the Tunis agenda, we had two elements. One was the so-called oversight function, where there was no agree who oversees the internet. And so this led to the formula of enhanced cooperation, which then became the subject of a lot of controversies, because some governments were not ready to accept that the US continued to control the oversight over the root server, because this was seen as the critical moment in the whole debate. And the other part of the compromise was we need more discussion before decisions are taken. We have to clarify what the issues are. And so a new discussion platform was proposed, and this became the Internet Governance Forum. So from the Tunis agenda, we have now these two interrelated processes. One is the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, and the other one is the discussion on the role of governments in the governance of the internet. And this culminated then in the so-called Jana transition, when the US government under the Obama administration decided to hand over the control, the oversight over the A-root server to ICANN.
The IGF, you mentioned it. Many times it is discredited as just a talking shop. How would you see it? Would you consider it a success or a talking shop as discredited by many?
When the IGF was established, this was seen by a lot of people as an experiment. And there was only a small group of people who were convinced that this will sustain over a longer period. So the original mandate was just for 5 years. And so people were skeptical that discussions will produce any results. But the IGF emerged as a unique body within the UN system, because there is no other place where the private sector, where the technical community, where civil society and the governments can talk to each other, without the obligation to produce a final result or to agree on something at the end of the meeting. So this talking shop was a tremendous, innovation in the system of intergovernmental negotiations, where governments talk to governments and are surrounded by the private sector, which lobby governments, or by civil society, which protest in the streets against the governments. So that means the governments became part of the multi-stakeholder model. And insofar, after 5 years, a lot of people said, okay, let's continue. And so we did see another 5 years. And after 10 years, the IGF became got another 10 years. And now in the with this plus 20 review conference, the IGF has now a permanent mandate. So it will be there as a special unit within the UN system. And this is unique because the UN is an intergovernmental body, and within the intergovernmental body, you have a multi-stakeholder platform. This is seen as an innovation for international relations, and let's wait and see what will happen in the future.
And Wolfgang, what happened with enhanced cooperation? How did that evolve? Was it ever solved?
It was not really solved for some governments, but the key point in Tunis was that the US government continued its oversight over the root server. And when the Obama administration decided in a process to give up this oversight function and to hand it over to ICANN. So this was a very critical point, because in the early 20,000 years, some governments believed that the control over the root server is like the kill switch for the internet. But the internet is a distributed system with 13 distributed root servers and more than 1,000 anycast servers. So there is no kill switch internet. If if you control just the A root server, you do not control the whole server system. And so it became a symbol without substance. So, and when the US decided to remove the symbol and said, this is no substance, and let it managed by an experienced organization, and ICANN has evolved over the years to a stable organization where all stakeholders are involved in their respective roles. And so this was a breakthrough. And for some governments who originally did not believe it, that the US government will give it away, they were now in a situation that they asked you, but what is the role of our government? They have all the opportunities in the Governmental Advisory Committee in ICANN, where they can raise their voice. But at the end of the day, nobody controls the internet. And so far, the problem of enhanced cooperation was settled by the JANA transition. But the idea of some governments to continue to call for governmental control of the internet is still on the table. And it comes back from time to time, and even in the year 2025, when we had the WSIS plus 20 negotiations, there were some governments who were calling now for a governmental track within the IGF and to change the IGF into an intergovernmental organization. So that means this is a political battle. This will continue. But fortunately, one of the key problems has been solved with the JANA transition in the year 2016.
Okay, Wolfgang, let's look a little bit further in the future. With the rise of artificial intelligence, several institutions, individuals, civil society, and governmental body are now calling for new processes. What do you think? How does the governance of artificial intelligence relate to internet governance? Is it the same? Is it something different? How do they play together?
This is a complicated issue because with regard to internet governance, you have a concrete resource, domain names, IP addresses, protocols, which need a certain management. The critical resource for AI is data, algorithm, which are probably not manageable. So that it's not a concrete resource like a domain name. So that means it's difficult to define an individual data or an algorithm. So that's a big difference. On the other hand, without the internet, no AI would have emerged. So that means basic principles for which are relevant for the management of the internet, like the multi-stakeholder approach, the holistic approach, transparency, accountability, inclusion, bottom-up policy development, and other principles which are enshrined in the Net Mundial Declaration from 2014 and in other documents, both within the United Nations and outside the United Nations, are relevant for AI. But I think governments have learned something, and there are some governments who want to use now the global debate on AI to introduce an intergovernmental mechanism for AI, which will be difficult. And we will discuss the future of AI governance in another podcast. At the moment, in the year 2026, we have a number of processes where AI governance is discussed in the G7, in the so-called pledge lay process, in the OECD. We have proposals by China to establish a world AI cooperation organization similar to ICANN, which was established by the Americans in the 1990s. China wants to have this WICO headquartered in Shanghai. There are now proposals from Africa to have an African initiative, and the UN has just recently started a process. They created an independent panel for AI, similar to the Climate Council. And this independent panel has to produce an annual report what will happen with AI, and has to report to another annual meeting, the Global Dialogue on AI Governance. The question is how the Internet Governance Forum and the Global Dialogue on AI Governance will cooperate. During a recent meeting in Brussels, the European IGF, there was made a proposal that the two bodies, the independent panel and the multi-stakeholder advisory group of the IGF, exchange liaisons so that they are informed. So that means what we will see are two parallel but interlinked processes. So internet governance will continue to oversee the management of the critical internet resources, and ICANN will be the main body. But for AI governance, we are still in an early stage, and it's still not yet clear whether the IA panel of the United Nations will move into such an organization, and how the global dialogue on AI governance will be linked to the Internet Governance Forum. So there are a lot of open questions for the next 5-10 years. And I think this is an invitation also to follow our next podcasts.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. As you said, we will dive a little bit deeper into the governance of artificial intelligence, but our next podcast, part 2, will deal with cybersecurity, cybercrime, and cyber war. Thank you very much for today. Stay tuned until the next time.